All right, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Hi everyone, so as Clifton said, my name is Sarah Monier and I'm a PhD student at UT Dallas where I study cognitive neuroscience, specifically aging, healthy aging, and how that changes as we go through life. So throughout my presentation, we're going to have an official Q&A at the end of the presentation, but if there's something that's unclear or if you would like to stop me and ask a question, just feel free to do so. But again, we'll do an official Q&A towards the end. Okay, so my presentation today is going to be about the science behind lifelong brain health and cognitive well-being. So I just quickly want to introduce a little bit first about the center where I work, the Center for Vital Longevity. We are part of UT Dallas, and we are dedicated to pursuing research that leads to cognitive health for life. So the Center for Vital Longevity was founded in 2010, and really we're just dedicated to studying how the brain and cognition develop and change with age. So we mainly ask questions like, why do some people age with very little cognitive decline while others show more severe cognitive decline and memory as they age? So what's going on there? We also work to identify brain markers that can predict individuals who are at higher risk for like Alzheimer's disease or other kind of related dementias. So our research really tries to identify early on who is going to develop these dementias. We don't only focus on older adulthood, we also study how early life brain markers can affect cognitive development and trajectory of memory as we age. Because very early on, our center was actually originally just older adulthood, but recently we introduced two new researchers who focus on like teenagers and childhood. So we are trying to go back in time as much as we can to see who's going to develop dementias and cognitive decline as they age. Okay. So next, just really quickly, I handed out a couple of pamphlets about the lead researchers at CVL, but I just quickly want to introduce a couple of them here. You can also go to the CVL website to learn more about their research. Each of these lead researchers runs their own lab, and together we just collaborate to understand and promote brain health across the lifespan. Okay, so my research as a student focuses on better understanding the changes that happen to our brain and memory as we age. So first, before we get into the actual data, I want to discuss why it's even important that we have this conversation. Why is it important that we talk about brain health and aging, and how does it affect all of us? So first, people on average are living longer. So by 2050, it's predicted that the number of adults aged 60 and older are going to double worldwide. So these figures here are just kind of showing the projected number of older adulthood and younger children that are expected by 2060. So this blue line here is showing the expected older adults, 65 and older trajectory. And as you can see, the years are listed here. By 2060, we are seeing a pretty big increase in how many older adults there are going to be. This is just for the US statistics. This pyramid here, this is showing just comparing the population number. So we have millions of people here from 1960 to the expected 2060. So as you can see, all age groups are increasing, but just look how many more older adults we're expected to have by 2060 than we did 1960, 100 years ago. And this figure kind of more clearly shows just how quickly this increase is happening. So by 2060, the number of individuals aged 65 and older, like I said, are expected to nearly double from the numbers that we have today. And because we're seeing such a large increase in the number of older adults, we're also seeing a bigger increase in age-related dementias and disorders like Alzheimer's disease. So this figure here is just showing, again, this is looking at 2050 and the expected numbers there. And this purple is showing older adults age 85 and above. And you can see from where we are around here today to the expected number of older adults who are going to develop Alzheimer's disease in 2050. So not only is the population getting older, but the risk of getting age-related dementias like Alzheimer's disease is also increasing. So not only does the increased aging population and the rising rates of dementia have drastic economic and societal impacts, but it also impacts families and caregivers. So here, this is just showing you that by 2050, the cost of dementia is going to rise nearly to $1 trillion. And as of 2025, nearly 12 million Americans are providing unpaid care for loved ones with Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. So again, it's important to have these conversations early because the numbers are just going up. And finally, it's important that we have these conversations about aging and brain health because intervention works best before symptoms start. So this conversation is relevant to whatever age you are. Really, this is important to begin protecting your brain as early as you can to support healthy aging as we grow older. Okay, so these are just a couple of points that I hope that you will come away with by the end of today's presentation. The first is to have a better understanding of how aging affects memory, cognition, and the brain. Number two is to understand why some people age better than others. So some people have more preserved memory while others show more severe memory decline. Number three is to recognize the difference between normal aging and signs of dementia. And finally, I want to provide some practical tips for supporting a healthy brain. Again, it starts early. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is how memory changes as we age. So first, I want to note that it's important we realize that there isn't only one type of memory. There are actually different types of memories, and one of them is called episodic memory. Episodic memory is memory for details of past events, and it's this type of memory that tends to decline with age. So, for example, if I ask you, what did you have for breakfast today? You're likely going to go back in time. You're going to think about maybe the food that you ate, maybe you recall the smell, what it felt like to sip your coffee, maybe who you were talking to, what you were reading. So these details surrounding the event are what we call episodic memory, and this starts to decline as we get older. So this graph over here is showing memory performance here on the x-axis, and then we have age here on this horizontal axis. And then you can see just how severely episodic memory starts to go down as we're getting older. And what's interesting to note is, this decline is starting pretty early. So we're already seeing declines happening around 35 to 45, and then there's this sharp drop from like 65 onwards. But there is good news. Not all types of memories decline as severely as episodic memory, and some memories can actually improve as you get older. So, for example, there is a type of memory called short-term memory, and this graph is the same as before. We have age down here and performance on the y-axis, and you can see short-term memory is relatively stable throughout your adulthood. So short-term memory is, say if I give you a phone number and you keep it in your mind just long enough to get a piece of paper and pen to write it down. So while you're holding that phone number in your memory, that would be considered short-term memory. This does not tend to decline very much as we get older. Another type of memory that doesn't decline as much as episodic memory is called semantic memory. So semantic memory is memory for general world knowledge. So for example, if I ask you what is the capital of France and you say Paris, you're relying on semantic memory to give me that information. So you likely don't remember when or where you learned that Paris is capital. No, it is just a type of knowledge that you know. This does not decline as severely as episodic memory, and it can actually improve as we get older. So this is kind of akin to saying that, with age we get wiser. So a lot of these world knowledges are something that you can still build up on as you get older. So one thing to note is that even though memory tends to decline on average as we age, there's actually a lot of individual differences, so between people on how severely memory declines. So in this graph, we have memory performance again here on the y-axis, and then we have age from 10 to 80 here on the x-axis. And each of these dots represents one person. And as you can see from this black line, memory performance is decreasing with increasing age. But one thing I want to point out, so here this green line represents the average performance of young adults, and circled here is a group of older adults who are actually performing better on memory than the average younger adult. So there are some older adults who are able to preserve and maintain their memory as they get older, and their performances can be equivalent to the average younger adult. So not everybody declines as severely as, say, a group of these older adults. And part of what we do in the CVL is try to understand why some people have preserved memory while others decline more severely. Okay. So having gone through some of the data that we work with, I now want to offer a couple of tips that you can, has some evidence behind it on ways that you can aid memory at any age. So the number one thing that I want to first point out is attention is very important for memory. So our research shows that attention is crucial for encoding or learning new information. So basically to encode something effectively, you have to be paying attention to it. We have this saying called garbage in, garbage out. So basically that means if you don't learn it right the first time or as you're learning it, you're not going to retrieve it very well. You're not going to have a lot of details because you weren't paying attention as you were learning it. So there are a lot of ways that you can kind of put this into practice into your daily life. Some of these are just a couple of personal tips that I like to use. What I like to do is filter out distractions before they even get to me. So for example, if I'm about to learn something or if I'm studying, I will proactively avoid or prevent distractions from getting to me once I'm in the work zone. So as easy as just silencing notifications on your phone is a good thing to keep in mind. There are a lot of productivity tools that you can use these days. One of my favorite is called the Pomodoro technique. Has anybody heard about the Pomodoro technique? You have? Really? Okay, that's awesome. Yeah, so basically the Pomodoro technique just entails that you give yourself, so you set your timer for, say, let's say like 25 minutes, 25 to 30 minutes, and during that 25 to 30 minutes, all you're doing is focusing on the task at hand. You can't look at your phone, you can't get up, you're just doing the task. And then you have a 5-minute break. During that 5 minutes, you can check your phone, you can get up to walk, and you repeat this cycle maybe 3 more times. And at the end, you can give yourself maybe a longer 15-minute break. So that's just something I personally find helpful, and a lot of people do, because you're giving yourself a window to work, and you know there's a break coming where you can actually do what you want. And there are a couple of apps you can do. Has anybody heard about the Forest app? No? Okay, so the Forest app is basically similar to the Pomodoro technique. You have a timer, let's say 25 minutes, and during the 25 minutes, a tree starts to grow. And if you touch your phone or you go on your phone, the tree dies. So it's like in that 25 minutes, you can't touch your phone, you're trying to avoid the distraction. And I'm saying phone because personally that's kind of like the biggest distraction I think for a lot of us now as we're working. But there are multiple things that you can put into practice. The main takeaway from this slide is just how important attention is for memory. Another kind of research-backed technique for improving memory is to use imagery or mnemonic strategies. So you basically are creating mental pictures in your mind and relating things to each other. So I have a quick example here that we can do. So let's say I give you 4 unrelated items to remember: an orange, keys, a bicycle, and a lamp. And the way this would work is that you come up with an interactive scenario in your mind where you're creating some kind of interaction between these 4 items, instead of just individually saying, I have to remember orange, a key, a bike, and a lamp. So the more bizarre the scenario, the better. So I can give you guys an example of something that I would do. So for example, one thing you can come up with is I imagine myself riding my bicycle home from work. As I unlock my door, I use my keys, and someone tosses an orange towards me as I'm unlocking the door. And it misses, flies through my window, and topples over a lamp on the table. And in that way, I created this fun scenario where now I can think back to what I created, and I remember there was a bike in there, keys, an orange, and a lamp. So this is something that you can kind of practice with. Maybe if you have a grocery list and you have individual items to remember, instead of taking the list, like reading the list as you're shopping, maybe before you go, you can kind of create this fun scenario in your mind. And as you're shopping, try to remind yourself of what you created. So this is just a little practice that you can do to kind of aid your memory throughout the day. Okay, just a couple more tips. This is kind of related to what we just talked about linking new information that you are learning to something you already know or a personal experience. Practicing retrieval, I think this is something we all know, but testing yourself is much more effective than just rereading something. Writing it down, so there's actually some research on writing aiding memory, so there's just something about putting pen to paper that really kind of reinforces what we're trying to remember. And then finally, one of the biggest ones is to avoid multitasking. So I think this is something, again, most of us know, but research actually shows that people are much worse at multitasking than we think we are. So we really can only pay attention to one thing at a time. We trick ourselves because we can switch between tasks, but that actually hurts memory more. It's much more effective to just focus on one task. So as much as you can avoid multitasking, the better it is going to be for your memory. Okay, so far we've talked about memory and how it changes as we age. And I also kind of gave you guys a couple of practical tips that you can start implementing in your daily life to kind of aid your memory. Since my research focuses on the neuroscience of memory as well, I now want to go and turn to talking about how the brain changes as we get older. So we know from extensive research that the brain shrinks as we grow older. So this is true even for healthy aging. So if your memory is great, you're functioning well, you don't have dementia, your brain is still shrinking as we're aging. So these figures here are from our lab. We're looking here at a younger adult. This is around 20 years old. And then in middle age, you can see there are more black spaces around the tissue of the brain. So already in middle age, around 45, we're already seeing that shrinking taking place. And then this older adult, this was, I believe, around 65 years old, you can just see how extensively the brain has shrunk. So there's a lot of black space around the brain. And again, I want to emphasize this older adult was completely healthy. They had great memory. They performed well, but their brain is still shrinking as we're getting older. So a couple of brain regions that are important for memory. I'll just quickly go over this slide. What we tend to focus on are what's called the temporal lobe. So this is kind of located near our ears. And within the temporal lobe, we have a few structures. One important one is called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus, we know, is very important for memory. So this blue here, this is also from our lab. This is just an MRI brain. And it's just showing where this hippocampus is located, somewhere like within our ear region. And this structure is pretty important for memory. The temporal lobes tend to see a lot of shrinkage with age. So this is one reason that we're seeing those memory declines as we're getting older. So I talked a few slides ago when we were talking about memory that there's a lot of individual differences in how much a person declines in memory as they get older. The same thing is true for how much the brain shrinks as we grow older. Not everyone's brain shrinks the same as everyone else's. So here we have cortical thickness on the y-axis. So we're going from thinner to thicker. And then we have age here. So we have a group of young adults, middle-aged adults, and then older adults. And you can see by this black line that the thickness of your brain is going down as we get older. This red line is representing the average thickness of a brain of a young adult. And what you can see here is that even in healthy aging, the brain is just thinning, and none of the older adults are above the average young adult. So this is just something we typically see. When we scan an older adult, they're always going to typically have thinner cortex than the average young adult that we're seeing, even if their memory is healthy. So one question we often get, so when we talked about memory, is memory declining because of this thickness in the brain is going down? The answer is to an extent, but brain function is also an important determinant of memory. So brain function is also something that we look at in our lab. Brain function is basically the activity of your brain as you're learning something or remembering something. So this is also data from our lab. I'll just quickly go over this. This is looking at encoding, so when somebody's learning something and when somebody's remembering something. And these bright orange spots is the brain activity. So where is the activity in your brain the most active during learning and then during retrieval or when you're remembering something? And if you remember a few slides ago, I talked to you guys about the temporal lobe and like the hippocampus area that's important for memory. And that's what we see. So when somebody's learning something, we have kind of minimal hippocampal activation or not as extensive as remembering. And when somebody's remembering something, we can see how much activity we're getting in these memory regions. And so typically, hippocampus function is relatively preserved with older age, so we don't see too many differences. However, if somebody has more severe memory decline, we might see less activity happening in these memory regions. Okay, so far I've talked to you about memory changes and how the brain looks, but I've talked to you about how it looks in healthy aging, so what is typically expected. Now I want to turn to abnormal aging, things like dementia, and what happens to the memory and brain with this type of aging. So a lot of people usually ask us, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease is actually a type of dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term for multiple different age-related losses of cognitive ability. And Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, and that's what I'll be talking to you guys today. Okay, so what is Alzheimer's disease? Alzheimer's disease involves a buildup of harmful proteins in the brain, which eventually leads to the cell death. So the cells in our brains are called neurons, and these proteins are sticky. They build up, and they eventually kill the neurons in our brains during Alzheimer's disease. And two of these proteins, we call them amyloid and tau. And this picture here, it's a little bit small, but what you can see is the amyloid. These sticky proteins are forming outside the brain cells, and they're starting to clump together, and this eventually leads to the death of neurons. Whereas tau, or we sometimes call it neurofibrillary tangles, these form inside brain cells, and they lead to cell death. So you can see with this picture just how severe Alzheimer's disease can thin the brain. So we have a healthy brain here, and this is somebody who is in the severe stages of Alzheimer's disease. So I want to talk about a couple of risk factors of Alzheimer's disease. So this is something CVL, the center I work, looks at, a lot of our labs. What determines if somebody's going to develop something like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and how come some people stay healthy? So the most important thing to remember is that except for a very few cases called early onset familial cases of Alzheimer's disease, the disease arises from an interaction of multiple factors. The biggest risk factor for dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease, is increasing age. So the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease doubles every 5 years after age 75. Another risk factor is genetics. So one type of gene you might have heard of related to Alzheimer's disease is called APOE4. And this increases your risk of developing the disease. So if you have the gene, it does not mean you're going to get the disease. It just means you have an increased risk for it. Some people have one pair of APOE4. Some people have two pairs of that gene. If you have one pair of the APOE4, it increases your risk. Two pairs even increase your risk more. Another risk factor is sex. So women have twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease compared to men. And there are a couple of theories on why this is. One of the reasons we think this is because women tend to live longer than men, so they just have more time to get to the age where they're going to actually experience Alzheimer's disease, whereas men typically die before they get to that very old age to develop the disease. A couple of more modifiable risk factors. One of them is cardiovascular health. So we know from research that things like hypertension, high blood pressure, can increase your risk of Alzheimer's disease. Other ones are things like obesity and diabetes. And then finally, prior head injuries, so especially concussions. So this has been shown to increase levels of the harmful protein I was telling you about, like tau, those sticky proteins in the brain. So if you get these repeated concussions in your brain, it can increase your risk of developing something like Alzheimer's disease. And this is important to keep in mind also for like young adults. So I know a lot of young adults are in like impact sports like football, things like that. We have seen from research that young adults who get repeated concussions actually have a higher risk of developing dementia later in their life. Again, I just want to emphasize that if you have any one or more of these factors, it does not mean you are going to get the disease. It just means you're at a greater risk. Okay, and then I also wanted to include this table here because I'll sometimes get questions from older adults who are concerned that they're experiencing memory loss and they're worried that they're showing signs of dementia. So I wanted to include a table here that tells you a little bit about the differences between memory loss and normal aging and those that are possible signs of dementia. So for example, you might notice as you get older that you're occasionally forgetting names or where you left items. This is typically normal. Possible signs of dementia would be something like frequently forgetting names of people that you are very close to, that you see every day, or misplacing items in very unusual spots. In terms of orientation, like where you are in time, sometimes with normal aging, we see that people forget, you walk into a room and you forget why you were there. That actually happens to me all the time. This is completely normal. A possible sign of dementia would be you're getting lost in familiar places, or you forget what time of the year it is, or how you got somewhere. Thinking and problem-solving skills. So maybe you might miss a bill or a payment once in a while. Somebody who might be showing signs of a more severe age-related decline would have difficulty managing money, following plans, or keeping up with monthly tasks. If you occasionally have trouble finding the right word, like the tip of the tongue, I get that all the time. That's completely normal. People who are starting to develop dementia, they'll struggle to follow conversations as you're talking to them, or they're not able to complete full sentences. And then finally, we also tend to see mood and behavior changes in dementia. But as you're aging, it's normal to feel a little more worried or low at times. Somebody with dementia tends to show more drastic mood swings, unusual fears, anxieties, or sadness. So this is just to kind of give you an idea of what's the difference between symptoms of normal aging versus something that might be pointing to something more severe. Okay. So what can you do to minimize your risk of dementia and stay cognitively healthy as you're aging? Again, these are things that you want to start implementing early, but it's never too late. So if you're a young adult, these are definitely good tips to keep in mind. But if you're already in the older stages, it's totally good to start implementing these. So a good mantra to follow, what we usually tell people, is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So staying fit, keeping your body healthy, eating good, these are stuff that we typically advise and will likely have the biggest impact. So even like a regular walk daily can make a big difference. Related to this point, I mentioned this before, but keeping your blood pressure well controlled is very important for brain health. I mentioned this on the previous slide, but preventing head injuries is a big one. Maintaining social engagement. So we know from research that older adults who experience loneliness typically are less cognitively healthy. So really just keeping, maintaining your social engagement with friends, with family, with your community really goes a long way. We tend to see that when somebody retires and is no longer, interacting as much with coworkers and friends, their cognition tends to decline much more. So really keeping that social engagement going is super important as you're getting older. Another one is protect your hearing. So this is actually a big one. We know from research that hearing loss is actually linked to memory loss and dementia. So things like wearing your hearing aids if needed is super important. And then finally, just keeping your mind active and engaging in mentally challenging activities and just never stop learning. So this goes a long way as well in protecting your brain health and making sure that you're not declining severely. Okay. So almost done here. I want to end by talking about common myths about brain health. So these are things I still see circulating around the internet, and I just want to put an end to it. One of them is that supplements work. So supplements work for brain health or to prevent dementia, boost your intelligence. That is not true. There is no evidence that supplements can increase your intelligence or prevent decline. So honestly, focusing on a healthy, balanced diet is probably going to go much further and save your money than buying expensive supplements that are not going to do anything. The next one is we only use 10% of our brains. Who's heard this one before? Yes. Okay, so I think it's been debunked for a while now. It's not true at all. We know from research that most areas of our brain are actually used. Even when we're at rest, we see different areas of our brain activating. It's not just 10% of your brain. A third point is that brain games improve your memory and cognition. So I know there's a lot of apps now that you can download that promise you that this will preserve your memory or make your memory better. There is very little evidence for that. What we see is that these games improve your performance and your memory on the game itself, but they don't necessarily translate to cognitive health outside of the game. So really just kind of keeping your options like diverse, just kind of as I mentioned on the previous slide, you are mentally challenging yourself, but don't rely on just 1 or 2 games that this will be what saves your memory and your cognition. And finally, people are either right-brained or left-brained. Has anyone heard this before? Okay, and then if you're right-brained, you're creative. If you're left-brained, you're logical. That is completely false. Our research does not show any of that. We don't see people favoring one side or the other. There is no evidence to indicate that right side people are creative, left side. There is no evidence for that at all. Okay, so those are just some common myths. There are more, but I feel like these are the ones I still see going around more. None of these actually have good evidence behind them. I guess that's my time's up. No. Okay. Well, I am actually on the last slide here. So we did have some handouts that give you information on if you're interested in being part of research. I do want to say that none of the research I showed you today would be possible without our volunteers who dedicate their time to helping us investigate how brain and memory changes as we get older. So if you're interested in being a volunteer and being part of brain research, we have, again, handouts, or you can go to the cvl.ut Dallas website or scan this QR code to get more information on how to become a volunteer. We do compensate you for your time as well as your mileage that you come to do the scans and the cognitive paperwork that we give you. But yes, and that is the last slide. I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
I saw a lot of smiles when you said you get compensated. Here it is. So that everybody can hear you, please raise your hand if you have a question and we'll pass you the phone. Actually, I have 2 questions.
Sure.
The first one is, how does environment play into your brain health?
That's a very good question. So we do now see from a lot of recent research that environmental health does impact brain health, so from very early on. So things if you live like in a high pollution area or you don't have access to healthy food, we see that is affecting you as early from early childhood, and that impacts you as you're developing. So environment's actually a really big one I didn't mention. I'm glad you brought that up. It makes a big difference in brain health.
Past traumas such as physical isolation, is that passed on to a person's children?
No. So if you have like physical traumas to your brain, like concussion, things like that.
You were locked up in a room as a child for a long time, and then that particular experience, I'm sure that would hurt someone's brain, but is that passed on to their children?
No, it's not passed on. I mean, trauma is a difficult one, right? Because the way you raise your kids, if you already have past trauma that you haven't really healed or worked through, that can definitely impact you, but it's not something genetic related or physical you pass on. It's something, more emotional, if even that. But we don't see that it passes on like any kind of, biological factor. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, thank you for being here. I don't think this.
No, it is.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. Thank you for being here. And I think, sir, what you were speaking about reminds me of epigenetics, but a lot of medicine people don't acknowledge that totally as a real thing, but I recognize what you're saying. So my question for you was, I was almost somewhat disappointed that you said supplements don't work. Mainly because the foods that we have here are nutrient void. The trace elements in our food supplies is severely diminished. So to hear you say that supplements don't work for brain health, I'm discouraged to hear that, and I want to know what was your basis on
so
saying
what
that.
I had said is supplements don't work for cognitive decline and for intelligence, right? So if you are deficient in a vitamin, you had a blood work and you're deficient, and you're taking some kind of vitamin or supplement that your doctor prescribed for you, that is important for brain health specifically, okay? But for preventing decline as we're getting older, That is not, there's no supplement that can market, it's boosting your performance, it's helping your intelligence, it's going to prevent dementia, decline. We have no evidence for that.
But even with that, I'm curious because vitamin D is one that people think is just for bones, but a lot of that has to do with mental and memory, as well as challenges like candida, which is a fungal sort of thing that can mess up your memory.
Right.
And there are supplements for that. So I just was kind of discouraged. And nootropics even.
So again, if you're deficient in them,
Yeah.
it's going to make a difference. But if you're not deficient in them and you're just taking these supplements to, you know, prevent you from developing something like dementia or to make you smarter, that's not going to work. If you're deficient and your doctor says you need to have vitamin D, it is going to impact your brain, your bone health and your nutrition, absorption, things like that. Then you should be taking that for general health.
That's a great question, so thank you for asking that. So what I'm getting from this is that it's important for us to be healthy.
Yes.
And you know, what we eat affects our health.
Exactly.
Supplements affect our health. So there are things that we should do just to be healthy.
Yes.
But when it comes to research and evidence to support some of the claims that if you take this,
Yes.
it will improve your mental capacity, there's just no evidence
Exactly.
for that.
Yeah, so
Right.
typically you need clinical trials where you have a control group and then people who are taking the supplements. There's very little research that has shown that the people who are taking this supplement don't develop cognitive decline. We saw no differences between the groups. So again, there's just very little evidence. But if you're deficient, you should be supplementing with something. That's true.
In your research, are you finding differences in people's race as far as dementia or the rate of things or how development?
Yes, we do actually. So individuals who, such as African Americans and Hispanic individuals, we are now seeing from research that they actually have a higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. The reason for this is likely comorbidities. It has nothing to do with genetics. So unfortunately, sometimes things like, as I mentioned, high blood pressure, obesity, these tend to be more prevalent in minority groups. And because of that, we see developing Alzheimer's disease much higher.
Is that because you have more sample size of them now as previously
Yes.
not having it?
Exactly. This is very new research because people did not used to look at minority groups. So a lot of this research is new, but we are seeing that African Americans, Hispanic individuals, they have a higher risk of getting Alzheimer's disease. Yes.
So back to the supplements. So I was thinking about MCT oil and then like some mushrooms.
I don't believe there's any research on that. I don't know specific vitamins such as MCT, but I know generally that, for example, omega-3, we know that's very good for brain health. Again, if you are having a healthy diet where you're eating fish, you have a balanced diet, you should be okay with that. If you are deficient in it, you should be taking it. But in terms of like controlled clinical trials, there has been none that showed that there's evidence in people who took these and did not take it in developing cognitive decline.
Thank you again for being here. A lot of information to kind of swallow. So as I talked to Clifton earlier, like I'm already forgetting things. I'm at that 45 mark where I'm seeing some differences in my brain function. I want to ask, because I'm vegetarian, with people that have different type of diets, could that affect, because I'm not getting the fish? So that's one question. And then my second question is, it kind of bleeds into the supplements. The food is different now. We have a lot of foods that have pesticide on it, wax and stuff on there. Have you guys studied anything that could affect your brain health as far as our food?
We have not looked at things like additives and pesticides in our research. I'm not familiar with research on that. I would have to look that up and get back to you. But in terms of like vegetarian or specific diets, again, if your blood test shows that you're deficient in something, this is why it's so important to get these tests done. If it shows that you're deficient in something, you should be supplementing for overall health, which includes brain health. If you're not deficient in it, it's unlikely that you taking extra supplements is going to do anything. Yes.
Any other questions?
Hi.
I also join in giving my appreciation
appreciation for
Thank you.
your being here and your presentation. Going back to the question of the environment's effect on brain health, can you be specific about which factors are very unhealthy for you, and how early or how late those factors will begin to affect you?
Yeah, so what we have seen, at least in CVL, the research that I'm familiar with that we've done in previous lab, specifically Dr. Wig. So I think Dr. Goggin Wig, if you look at the paper I give you with the researcher, he's done a lot of research on Alzheimer's risk factor and environment. I would suggest reading his research. But he has looked at things like air pollution, so we know that's like a big factor. Also access to food, like access to healthy food, whole food, things like that. And honestly, the more we're studying early life, as I told you, our center is now going back and all the way to like teenagehood and early childhood. The more we're going back and back, the more we're seeing how crucial this early development period is for these kind of factors, and even maternal health. So in terms of how early do these things affect you, I mean, it's likely in the womb, honestly. If you're living in a bad environment with high smoke pollution, again, low nutrient access, and as a mom, you're pregnant, that's likely going to affect the fetus health, which is going to affect their development throughout life. So what we know from recent research is just how important early development is. In terms of like specific age, I can't give you that. I just know that, health starting very early in the womb is extremely healthy. Extremely imperative that, the maternal health is good in terms of like how the child is going to develop to old age.
So air pollution and those factors that
Yes.
are environmental,
Yes.
that we cannot do anything about.
Yes,
That we can't do
exactly.
anything about.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Unless you move out of there, you can't do anything. But we are now seeing from recent research again that how crucial it affects your brain health. Smoking, things like that, even like secondhand smoke, is just extremely important. It has been overlooked in research up until like a decade ago, so it's still very new, but the impact of it is pretty large.
Thank you. So water, there are many results of studies about the water
like
we
metals
drink.
and-
Yes.
yeah.
In addition to now the studies that say that are drinking the bottled water from the plastic, that we're getting a little bit of that every time we drink that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how do you avoid living?
Exactly. I mean, it's difficult. I mean, these are things that are modifiable, but for a lot of people, you have no choice in it because it's part of your environment. And we know now, like we're seeing, there's been a lot of data on like microplastics and how it just stays in your body. I think recent research has shown that we found like these microplastics in individuals with Alzheimer's disease in their brain as well. So again, all of this is still pretty new research, but we're seeing in terms of like the plastic, how much detrimental effect it can potentially have on the body and the brain.
So one of the things I want to bring up, I'm going to give you the mic, but I was looking at this slide because I asked you before about sleep.
Yes.
It's just getting more sleep to make you smarter, but we did a workshop in July on physical fitness, and physical fitness is physically moving as well as what you eat and what you take into your body. But this slide that I'm looking at that talks about what we can do, stay fit. And you said what is good for your heart is good for your mind.
Yes.
So that covers a lot, supplements
Yes.
and everything.
Yeah.
But then also preventing head injuries,
Yeah.
maintaining social engagement, what we're doing now, engaging, not isolating yourself, protecting your hearing, because if you have less sensory information coming in, that can affect your brain.
Yeah.
And then keeping your mind active in reading and learning and educating, always learning.
Right.
Listening to podcasts, coming to workshops like this, learning a foreign language.
Yes.
Those are all positive things that I was listening for, because my daughter is telling me it's taking me longer to calculate the tip on a check. Or she's just noticing a lot of stuff. It's like, you don't need to tell me. I'm experiencing it. I know, right? But I just want to make sure that you're walking away with things that you can actually do.
Yeah.
You have the link to the slides. We're not going to remember almost 70% of what we're hearing now when we leave. That's why this is being recorded. So definitely go back, look at the slides, listen to this again, and stay connected.
Yes.
But who's the next? I'm going to get.
We had one
Let's
up
go
here
1,
too.
2, 3. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
She can't talk, so I'm going to ask her a question. What is the single most important thing a person can do to increase their brain health?
Don't get old. Honestly, that's the biggest risk factor. So don't get old. That's basically sums it up, because as we age, like I told you, the biggest risk factor for dementia, Alzheimer's, is age. And honestly, after not getting old, it's really a combination of multiple factors, like what we talked about. It's not just one thing. You can't just pinpoint one thing and be like, if I don't do this, I'm not going to. So a lot of the ones that are the biggest risk factors are out of our control. Age, genetics, I talked about the APOE4 gene. You can't control if you have that or not. Sex, as I said, women have a higher risk. And then the modifiable risk factors I talked about, it's a combination. It has to be put into, there's not just one that has the biggest effect.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Every time you say sex, I'm thinking, having enough sex? Or
Yeah.
what? No, tell me I'm not the only one thinking about that, right? Wait, who was the other hand? Oh, yeah, okay.
Good morning, and thank you for the information.
Yes.
The specific reason that I'm here is I have someone in my family who does have symptoms of dementia. Long-term memory is very good, tells great stories, remembers stuff 60 years ago. But the names of things today, what you had for breakfast, names of people that I know they know. Know that there may not be very much they can do about it now, but one thing that I have tried to encourage him to do is turn the TV off and read. Kind of a hard sell because they were a educator. I've read enough books in my life. Two things. Any correlation, you mentioned brain activity, reading, and correlation of being able to maintain brain strength, as you mentioned, brain activity, and also you mentioned overall physical and heart health. Any specific things that you would recommend staying away from?
In terms of physical health, like activity?
No, diet.
Diet, staying away from
For
diet.
instance, sugar.
Okay, gotcha.
So.
Yeah, okay, so let me answer, the last question first. So in terms of diet, I think the biggest thing, again, what's good for your heart is good for your brain, but alcohol, it should be stayed away, which I don't want to sound like a hypocrite because I don't stay away from alcohol, but that's like a big one for brain health and heart health. So we know that has a lot of detrimental. In terms of sugar, that is, because of the link between diabetes and brain health, diabetes is the problem, not necessarily you eating sugar. Of course, you want to minimize your sugar for general health and thus brain health, but the biggest thing is diabetes has the biggest effect, and you want to keep that controlled. So if you do have diabetes, you're taking your insulin. There's just a really big correlation between diabetes and Alzheimer's disease. In terms of the reading, I don't know any good study that had actually sufficient evidence that reading itself is going to protect you from cognitive decline. It's really the mental challenge of what you're reading. So you want, if reading, like sometimes we automatically, we get good at reading and it's just like you're reading like a novel and it's not really like a challenge. I don't know if that's enough to keep you cognitively healthy. Really the big thing is just keeping you challenging yourself. So once it becomes easy, it's probably not going to be as effective anymore. Television
consumption, good, bad?
Again, I don't believe there's any research specifically on television consumption, but if you're not, if you're just passively watching something and not exercising your brain, then obviously that's probably not going to be good for you. You want to just keep doing something that is actually difficult and takes effort.
So the key is continue to challenge the brain,
Yes.
continue to learn new things. You talked about new languages.
Exactly.
And or something that's more dense reading
Yes,
as opposed to.
I like language because that's something that's continuously challenging. So even if you get, okay with one language, you can move on to another one, and just really challenging yourself. In terms of reading, it can get easy, is why I'm saying, and it depends what you're reading. So yeah, just kind of keep that in mind. It should be hard. It should be challenging. Yes.
I have the mic.
What about alcohol consumption as
Yeah.
a contributing factor?
So we do know from evidence and data that alcohol is not good. It doesn't cause, again, dementia, but just like it can impact your heart health, it can also impact your brain health. Yes.
couple more factors I wanted to ask you about. In your studies, what about class? In your research, do you find that people that are well off are better than people that are less well off?
Yes, so we do see a correlation between individuals who come from like a higher income background versus somebody from a lower income, but that is due to multiple factors, like we talked about, environmental factors. So it's likely somebody coming from a low income just doesn't have the same resources as somebody from a higher income, and that is what is impacting brain health.
Okay.
Specifically, yes.
And then my last question is, some parents, they want to do early training with their children, like having them listen to Brahms, things like this. Is that considered in your research?
To listen to what?
Brahms, the music.
Oh, okay.
and
So I don't believe we've looked at that, but what I can tell you is that if you're doing something challenging as a child, but you stop as you get older, it's no longer effective. So what we see is the biggest impact on cognition is that you're continuously doing something challenging throughout your life. If you stop once you're middle age and older, we don't see the effects that you were doing as challenging, as a kid, or let's say you went to college, but then you're no longer studying after college, it drops down, right? So once you stop, the effect is gone. It needs to be a continuous thing that you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you for being here.
Thank
I
you.
just want to ask, what if you already have it and you're 87, and what would you do? I mean, you've been doing like supplements, but it was already too late. As you saying, as me right now, 61, I should maybe start or something like that. But if you're already way past, what?
Yeah, so we can't reverse, right? What you can do is prevent any more, or try to prevent as much as you can a more severe decline. And so the things that I talked to you about today are just as applicable to somebody who's already experiencing these declines as it is to somebody who's not yet, experiencing them. So you might not go back to a higher baseline than what you're at now, but you can definitely prevent yourself or try to minimize as much of the decline as you can by implementing the strategies that I've talked with you about. It's just as important for you as it is for anybody else who's not experiencing declines.
But if you're already there,
So if you already have dementia, or
me, but I'm just saying.
something more severe,
Yes.
at that point it's really just about basically taking care of the symptoms. So if you've already got Alzheimer's, dementia, you can't reverse brain cell death. So once you already have it, there are now new medications coming out that seem to be promising, but unfortunately, once you're in it, you can't get out of it. Yeah, and that's why prevention is so important, that you start when you're still healthy.
Great questions. Okay, this is the last question for now, just for the session, then I got to close out. You close this out.
Hey, I just had one question. I see this commercial on TV about Prevagen. It's supposed to help your memory. You haven't seen that commercial?
I have not seen Prevagen. Is it a medication?
It's supposed to be something that enhances the memory.
And it's like a prescribed medication?
I don't know if it's prescribed or what. I think you can buy it
It's over the counter? Yeah, so that's where the problem is, because again, like I talked, unless you have controlled randomized clinical trials, which I don't know if that did, I would have to look that up. I haven't heard about it. We don't have the evidence to say that works. You need to have a control. I will. Okay, let me Google it.
Okay, well, while she's Googling it.
Yeah, I can Google it while we.
So I'm going to say this. So first off, thank you guys for showing up. Thank you for the questions. Give it up for yourselves.
Thank you.
So it's so, I hate it when there are any questions and it's like dead silence. There are some good questions here. So I want to say this too. In every Empower Series program, our goal is to give you 4 things. We want to give you hope that whatever it is that you envision for yourself, you can achieve it. We want to inspire you to act on your ideas, be a better steward of your ideas, take those actions. So we're taking a lot of notes. Please take notes, remember these, and in the survey, I ask that you please complete the survey. You can do the QR code if you don't want to write it out on paper, but this information will really help us create tailored programs that are for you, that are beneficial, and it will be good to do. So we appreciate your feedback. Help us be better. So we want to encourage you to take action. We definitely want to educate you. So my question real quick, have you been educated? Did you learn something new today? Great. So we're hitting on all 3. The last thing is to connect you to resources to help you take that next step to achieve your goal or what you envision. And we can never do it by ourselves. You know, the Empower series is not just somebody's idea. It's like, if it wasn't for the volunteers, so thank you, love for the volunteers. If it wasn't for AE Media Group, you and all of those supporters. So give it up for everybody that's come together to create the movement, the Empower series. We have some great speakers, and it's important to stay connected. So what I would like you to do, if you've done what you're searching, is after you answer that question, give us, again, the best way of getting in touch with the center or yourself, so that we don't lose the opportunity to follow up with you and get more information specifically that we may not have asked right now. So do you have the answer now?
Yeah. So some of the handouts that I gave you today, it shows you the different individuals, their labs, and then the website you can go to. So once you visit the cvl.utdallas.edu/research, each of these labs are going to come up, and then under the description of each lab is how to participate in research, and then it gives you the contact information as well. So if you have any questions about it, just visit that website, and yeah.
And how to get paid, right? So,
Yeah.
So did you Google anything while we were? So, and just be clear again, no evidence. You know, it may help, it may not, but there's just no study and evidence that connects them.
Exactly. So they have
Okay. So with that being said, we can talk forever, couldn't we? Yes. Okay. So I want you to give it up for Sarah again for giving us her brilliant knowledge. So thank you. And I say this is not the end. This is the beginning. There's a table. There's a lovely Sherry. Wave your hand like this, Sherry. Okay, yeah, so definitely don't leave paper at that table. So definitely take something. But to our online audience, you know, there wasn't a lot of comments. You were taking a lot of notes, so I'll go back to make sure that you're represented here. So I want to thank you for sticking in with us. We're going to shut down at 11:30 online. Here we're going to do some more mingling and cleaning up before we leave the building. But I want to thank everybody. Thank the online audience. Thank you. Give you guys some love again. Come on, give it up. Energy. Thank you.
Thank you.
But please, if you're online, the links to the handouts and everything is in the description. Email me at thrive@empowerseries.com if you want more specific information and knowledge. Stay connected to us on our social media account. You're on YouTube, so definitely subscribe. And nothing like this can be done at no cost. So we are a nonprofit organization. If you want to make a donation, you can go to our website, www.empowerseries.com, or easily you can text give or donate to 214-225-6337. We're always open. But give of your time, your talents. But thank you so much, because your time is your most precious resource. So I'm going to say goodbye for now online. And until next time, our next workshop is going to be September 30th. It's going to be on life insurance. It's going to be real talk, real impact. We're going to have a few people talk about their experience of having enough life insurance and some people who did not have enough. And then we're going to play a game as well called Life Insurance Bingo. So it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be live streamed, so I'll see you next month. And thank you again for tuning in.